Before I move on, I must admit, I certainly don't have the credentials to sit over here on a dais and pontificate about wholesome leadership. I know there are many others over here in the audience, let alone Arun, of course, who to my mind is at a fairly enlightened stage of what the true meaning of all this is about. But I also see people such as Bharat sitting over here in the audience who are very accomplished practicing managers, and I'm sure there are many more. So please bear with me. I'd just like to walk you through some of my own experiences across the 30 years of my working life and what is it that I've learned and picked up. And maybe after that, as Arun said, have a conversation with you. And I'd certainly like to hear from you and learn from you as well as to how do you relate to some of those experiences. To begin with, I've been fortunate in my career to have had 3 different sets of experiences which have kind of molded me as a person, leader, manager, whatever it is that you might call it. The first one being with Wärtsilä, which is a Finnish company. And since I was young, that is where I spent more than 20 years of my almost 30-year working career. That shaped me as a person, as an individual. And I think it's important to understand that here is a country called Finland, which is just about 5 million people, a very egalitarian society, meaning there are no highs and lows, everyone is alike, a very prosperous country. It's one of the most innovative countries in the world, a completely social welfare state, meaning people get taken care of right from the time they are born till they die. And even in such an environment, this is an innovative society. It's one of the most innovative countries in the world that has more than a dozen global brands that have global market shares in chosen niches of more than 30–40%. Nokia used to be one of them. You had others like Otis, you certainly have Wärtsilä, all the paper industry, and they found niches in areas such as making dentist equipment chairs. So all the dentistry chairs that you find in the world, almost 60% of them come from Finland, and so on and so forth. And you wonder, how does a set of 5 million people living in one of the most hostile environments in the world, where everything gets taken care of, still find it in them to innovate, to be the best, to have the best value system in the world, to be the most ethical society in the world, not be at each other's throats, and so on and so forth. And this is something that struck me day in and day out. It amazed me every day. I lived there for about 6 years. My son was born over there. He's so proud about the fact that he was born in Finland. This is an amazing society. And I think this kind of culture and environment also manifests itself in the companies and the organizations that there are. So what does that really mean in an organizational context? The first thing would be that is there even an identified person as a leader? Does everyone in that organization want to be a leader? And to me it was surprising. The day I joined, I had another Finnish friend of mine who also joined the company at the same time. Whereas my ambitions were pretty clear. I wanted to become a manager, then a senior manager, and so on and so forth. Remember, I was 21 at that time. So I suppose you'll forgive me for those kind of aspirations at that point in time. But here was my colleague Finland, called Kari, about the same age, and his only ambition in life was, I don't want to become a manager. I don't want to become a managing director of Wärtsilä. I want to go home at 4 in the evening so that I can have a good time with my family, take care of my garden, and lead a good life. 20 years down the line, 15 years down the line, I did become a manager and so on and so forth. I did go on to be on the board of management of Wärtsilä globally. Kari remained a sales engineer out of choice. He made that choice. I don't know at the end of 20 years, and we are the best of friends even today, I don't know at the end of 20 years, was I better off, was he better off? I still don't have a clear answer to that question. And many a times, when me and my wife discussed it, I think we came to the conclusion that maybe he's far better off than what I was, or where we were. It just kind of exemplifies what are the drivers that go behind working, what is it that makes you work, what is it that wants you to become a leader, and so on and so forth. Maybe it's the environment, maybe it's the context, but the point I'm making is that the purpose or the reason as to what drives you or motivates you is extremely crucial. And I must say I was extremely fortunate to have grown up in such an environment because it did mold a number of my thoughts, number of my actions subsequently, and made me a completely different person. Without that experience, I would not be the person that I am today. So you would wonder, so what is it that a company like Wärtsilä or Finnish organizations would strive to be? And the way I figured it, that they've decided that since it's such a small country, they need to be niche technology leaders on a global basis. The domestic market obviously is not big enough. They've got to be global in scale. They may not have the wherewithal to be large organizations, but they could pick up a niche, and in whatever niche it is that they might want to excel in, they would be global leaders. And that's what exactly almost every organization in Finland did. Nokia, of course, went on to be one of the global leaders even in terms of scale, but others occupied dominant market shares in a number of places. And again, more than a dozen global brands having a global market share of more than 30%. It's not a joke to have global market share of 30% in no matter how small a niche that you might want to choose. An amazing set of people, an amazing society. But the one other thing that I also learned over there was that even those people were not happy in many respects. And I used to have a discussion with another friend of mine. He said, when he used to visit India at times, he said, you are so lucky that when you get up in the morning, you've got a problem on your hand. You can't get to work on time, you don't have a gas connection at home, or the cylinder hasn't arrived on time, your transport hasn't arrived on time. And then when you get the gas connection, you are a satisfied man, you are happy. And then when you reach your office on time, you are happy. He says you have many moments of happiness and many moments of despair. It's much better than me, who's got just one monotonous life. It took me a while to really understand what is it that this guy is telling me. But just think about it. That there is no good without the bad. There is no happiness unless and until there is sorrow. And everything is relative. And if here I was thinking that these are the guys who have it all, this is where we should be, this is my ultimate nirvana in a manner of speaking, there were this set of people who said exactly the same thing about us. And I don't know if it means that life ultimately turns a full circle, but the point remains that it is all indeed very relative, and even in that society, in that construct, we did have people who were not, let's say, satisfied or happy with what they had. They wanted some discomfort in their life. If I then move on to my next set of experiences with the Tata Group, I spent close to about 5 years there. I was on the board of Tata Power. Just being on the board where a person like Ratan Tata was the chairman, and I know you've shared a lot of time with him, is an experience in itself. Here is an organization which is completely devoted and committed towards serving society. That's what it's all about. Everything else is secondary to the service and commitment to society. The one thing I knew while sitting in Bombay House was that if I made a mistake, and I did make many of them by the way, involving fairly large sums of money, it wasn't a problem, not an issue at all. I just had to say that yes, I made this mistake, this is going to be the impact, and it was all right, you go on. But God forbid, if there was a shareholder, or a customer, or an employee, or any member of the public, because Tata Power was distributing power into the city of Mumbai and also in Delhi, who would come to the office or lodge a complaint with Mr. Tata to say, I went to meet Mr. Agrawal and he did not behave properly with me. That's all. There's nothing more that was required. And I knew that if that was the one single quote-unquote complaint, that would be the end of my duration in Bombay House. The point I'm making is that the commitment to society, the commitment towards serving others was paramount and over and above any and every other thing that came onto the table. There are stories galore about what the group has done to society. I don't want to go through all of them. Everyone is aware of those. But it was a choice that was made by the organization, by the leaders of the organization. It was a purpose. They were clear about the purpose, and that's what has driven the organization to where it is today. It's no surprise, it's no wonder that it is an organization where it is. I would say dedication with which that particular purpose has been pursued right through to the very end. My most recent experiences have been with GE. And I've got a colleague of mine, Leela, sitting over here from GE, and I was just looking at her when Arun was talking about wholesome leadership, people, how does it relate to GE? To share an example with you, and the reason why I'm saying that is I think GE is largely known for many things, including leadership development, which I'll come to in a minute, but it's also known for its absolute die-hard commitment towards performance, towards shareholder return, and financials, and the quarterly numbers, and so on and so forth. Anyone that you talk to about in GE, I mean, that's the first thing that comes to your mind. I still remember a situation where we had a professor from one of the universities address a gathering of GE people and asking the audience, so what are the P's of doing business or marketing? And you had 300 people raise their hand and unanimously say, price. That was the first P. And she said, this is the only gathering anywhere in any organization in the world where the first P that you talk about is price. Normally you would talk about other things, product and promotion, whatever, but in GE we talk about price. And the point I'm making is that I think GE as well, a 130-year-old organization, started by a scientist, the only company on the stock exchange over there that has still survived over all this period, paying dividends for the last, how many years has it been up? For the last, I think, 100 years or so, paying out dividends to shareholders, deeply committed towards technology, deeply committed towards shareholder return. But over the last 10 years, I'd say there's a clear shift in what is the purpose of GE. Why is it that GE is in business? And if 10 years ago you would have asked somebody in GE, what's the purpose of GE? My guess is 9 times out of 10 the answer would be shareholder return, profitability, quarterly earnings. That's how you define GE, that's what GE is all about. Today, if you talk to people in GE, and if you talk to the chairman of GE, he will talk about, so what is GE all about? And he'll say GE is all about curing, powering, moving. These are the businesses that GE is in, and this is the service that it provides to people. There is a clear shift in the focus, moving away from a very strong, hardcore commitment towards shareholder return, towards a larger delivery of a need that society and people all over the world have. And I'd like to discuss a few more things with you as to, is this delivered as a consequence of an inner realization, or is this the way that business will have to perform and conduct itself in the years to come? Let's debate that. But the fact is that this is where GE is today, and this is the way GE conducts its business today. Just this morning, I was at the CII National Council meeting. There was a discussion on the new land bill, which, as you know, has been now promulgated by the it's an act now, it's being approved by the President. and we had the Minister Jairam Ramesh explain the land bill. Clearly, as we all know, as a consequence of that bill, the cost of land for industry, etc., will go up substantially. And the numbers are anywhere between 3-4 times to 7 times of what they are presently, roughly speaking. Out of 150 business leaders sitting over there, not one of them would say that this is not the right thing to do. There is a larger commitment towards society. There is a larger commitment towards the people whose land is going to be acquired forcibly for the purpose of development. There is a manner in which those people need to be treated. And I'm getting back to that point that I made about GE as well, which was, I would argue that as we move on and as we conduct business in the future, whether we like it or we don't like it, we will be compelled to look at the larger good before we begin to look at individual and organizational goods and benefits. The faster we realize it, the better it is. And this is something which I think people are beginning to realize, but I must say, beginning to realize rather slowly. That you that you have a larger purpose towards society before you begin to think about what's in it for me, for my organization, myself, and so on. But I was kind of just looking at the subject of wholesome leadership, and again, as I said, I mean, Arun's been at this now for so many years. He knows the subject, he understands the real meaning or the essence, but I had to look up a dictionary. So I did look up a dictionary. And I looked up the meaning of the term wholesome in the dictionary. And what I found was it said, conducive to promoting moral and ethical well-being. I'm pretty sure Arun didn't put the prefix wholesome by looking at a dictionary. It came from his heart. But when we talk about wholesome, I wonder how many times do we really think of the term moral and ethical. We perhaps think about it as being a round term, that kind of covers various facets and dimensions. But do we look upon it as something that covers moral and ethical as well? My guess is not. It did not occur to me, to be honest, the first time. But that was the definition of wholesome. And I'll just come back to this as well in a minute. The other, of course, leadership. All of us here would have been through umpteen sessions, read umpteen books on leadership. It's one of those subjects that has been most well researched, debated, discussed, etc., etc. I'd just like to, there are two definitions of leadership that appeal to me a lot, and I'd like to share that with you and take it from there further. The first one that appeals to me is that leadership is just about being yourself. It is that simple and it is that difficult. Because more often than not, people as well as organizations try and be like somebody else. Let me be like a Nokia. Let me be like a so-and-so organization. Or let me as an individual be like someone else. Why can't we just be ourselves? And I think if we are just ourselves and let our own passions drive us, that will be the most natural way of coming across, convincing people and leading people. I know this is easier said than done, but this is something which, to my mind, appealed to me a lot, and I thought I'd share this with you. The second definition of leadership that appeals to me a lot is, it's all about making others perform better in your presence, and for that behavior to continue even after you have left. The underlying score of fact being, it's all about others. And I think it's rather difficult to get to this realization that leadership is in fact all about others. Change is the only constant. I think everyone, all of us raised our hand when we said that, the one thing that's happening is change. I would say that the rate of change and the kind of change that we're now seeing is a lot more dramatic and a lot more frequent than what it was, say, if you go back 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years. How many businesses today can really make a 5-year plan given the amount of uncertainty that we have? We can't even think 6 months ahead. We don't even know what the outcome of the election will be, and therefore what will the policies be. How do you make a business plan in that environment? For a global company like GE, how do you make a global business? It's a $150 billion company. How do you make a 5-year plan for a company that operates in that size with such a large degree of uncertainty and volatility? And I go back again to the point that Arun made, which is that if you know what is your core purpose, your core reason for being in business or about yourself, handling uncertainty or volatility will come easy. The point I'm making is that in today's complexity, without trust, it is impossible to be able to conduct this. The last point I'd make is about communication. When we talk about leadership, you cannot but talk about communication. The manner in which we relate to people, the younger generation today, or the younger generation communicates, is a lot different than what it did about 20 or 25 years ago. Have we learned those methods of communication? We've got to delegate, and in order to delegate, trust is extremely important, without which it's not going to work. Communication in a language which is understood by the younger generation is key. I hope we are getting our communication systems right. And finally, it's all about the larger development, the larger good, putting others before self, because if we don't get that right, we would not have got anything right as leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Banmali, for very enlightening and informative sharing on these principles.